Hello friends, hope you have an amazing day and welcome to my new blog. Today our topic is labor cost. So as we all know, labor can be direct as well as indirect. Direct labor is that which can be charged to specific cost units directly. Indirect or indirect labor is one of the direct allocation of which is not possible. If wages can be allocated to different jobs or products on a convenient basis and are paid to workers engaged directly in the fabrications of products, the wages are direct. The wages are indirect when the worker are not directly engaged in the manufacturing of products, and the wages cannot be identified to particular jobs or products. The examples of indirect labor are wages paid to supervisors, workmen, uh, inspector, materials handler, timekeeper, foreman, watchman, cleaner, etc. The example of direct labor is wages paid to workmen put on definite jobs or products in the factory or organizations. So learn about labor cost classifications. Number one, direct labor cost. Number two, indirect labor cost. So now we discuss in details about labor cost, direct labor cost, indirect labor cost with meaning, type, classification of it, accounting, control, example of different features, labor cost per units and more about the labor cost. Now labor cost, direct labor cost, number two, indirect labor cost. In details, the term labor is defined and interpreted by different authors in different ways, depending upon various aspects, including the need and circumstances. Anyhow, all these are unanimous in stating labor as human services, that is, effort put in by the employees or workers for productive purposes and or for revenue generating activities. Now, the labor cost therefore denotes the remuneration, both direct and indirect, paid by the employer organizations to their employees to obtain their services in organization. The labor cost is normally classified into two categories on the basis of its identifiability with the cost unit. They are number one, direct labor cost, and number two, indirect labor cost. So direct labor represents the labor which is directly engaged in the production of goods and services that I mentioned earlier. Hence, the quantum of labor effort put in by the employees can be identified with the cost unit. So, therefore, direct labor cost refers to that portion of wages which can be identified with to charge to cost unit. And indirect labor cost, on the other hand, indirect labor represents the labor which is not directly engaged in the production of goods and services but helps indirectly the direct labor engaged in manufacturing activities. Hence, indirect labor cost refers to the labor cost which is not easily identifiable with the chargeable to a cost unit but which can be uh, apportioned to absorbed by cost center. Now repairs, timekeepers, mechanics or cleaners etc. are examples of indirect labor and therefore their salaries and wages are example of indirect labor cost which is a part of overhead expenses. What is labor cost? Direct and indirect labor with examples. The labor spent in altering the construction, composition and condition of the product is known as direct labor. It must be directly identifiable with the products so that direct allocations to the cost center or cost unit is possible. So example of direct labor are operators in the production processes. Operators directly engage in manufacturing jobs as you all know, workers in assembly lines, etc. And indirect labor is that labor which is not directly engaged in the production of goods and services but which indirectly helps the direct labor engaged in production in organizations of its productions. The example of indirect labor are supervisors, sweepers, watchmen, timekeeper, etc. Repairers, etc. The cost of indirect labor cannot be conveniently allocated to the particular job, order, or process. The line of uh, demarcations between direct and indirect labor is very thin. For example, wages paid to a foreman at a fixed point of production are direct. On the other hand, if he is engaged in repairing various machines in the factory, thereby making identifications difficult and costly, his wages would be indirect. Nevertheless, this distinction is essential because direct labor is part of parcel of prime cost, whereas indirect labor costs are treated as overheads. It helps in preparing labor cost estimates also, and it facilitates introductions of incentive schemes, and it prevents errors in the allocation of overheads. Labor cost classifications, direct and indirect labor cost with different labor cost is the second major element of cost, especially in marketing using more manual operation. Hence, proper accounting and control of labor cost should be made. This is achieved by balancing productivity with wages. Higher wages for higher productivity reduce labor cost per unit as well as overheads expenses per unit. Now, once recruited, it is very difficult to remove a worker, and hence the management must make best use of him by imparting proper training, giving better tools, providing healthy working condition and better wages. For effective managerial control over labor cost techniques like production planning, labor budget, labor standard, labor performance report, labor cost accounting, effectiveness of wages, incentive schemes, etc. may be adopted in organizations. Now, direct and indirect labor cost. For the purpose of accounting, labor cost may be classified into direct labor cost, as I mentioned earlier, and indirect labor cost. So, direct labor cost is the cost of all labor expended for changing the construction, composition, or condition of the product. It is that the portion of the employee's remuneration which can be conveniently identified with the charges to a particular job, product, process, or operation. That I mentioned earlier, labor cost is treated as direct cost when there is direct relationship between labor cost and product, process, or cost unit. Labor cost may be measured on the basis of this relationship, and labor cost is considerable. It varies directly with the volume of outputs. Wages paid to the workmen engaged in machine shop, assembly shop, etc. are examples of direct labor cost. Indirect labor cost are not identifiable with the production of specific goods or services. Salaries and wages paid to inspector, foreman, maintenance staff, purchase assistants, security staff, canteen staff, material handling, medical centers, stores, and offices, etc. are examples of indirect labor cost. So, workers engage in productive cost, a productive job or processes are called direct workers. Ideal time, waiting time, machine repairing time, etc. of direct workers shall be treated as indirect labor. So, difference between direct and indirect labor. The distinction between direct and indirect labor depends on the nature of work, practicability, and expediency. Direct labor cost forms part of a prime cost, whereas indirect labor cost is a part of overhead expenses. And direct labor cost can be controlled easily, but indirect labor cost can be controlled only by comparing actual with departmental budgets also. Identifications of direct and indirect labor cost is important for determining accurate product cost, marginal cost, and contribution of products, measuring efficiency of performance, preparing information regarding labor cost analysis, and avoiding errors in overhead allocation. Indirect labor costs are accumulated, added, and apportioned to various cost centers on equability basis and absorbed into product cost through overhead absorption rates. What is direct cost and indirect labor? Direct and indirect labor can be direct. Labor can be direct as well as indirect. Direct labor is that which can be charged to specific cost units directly, and indirect labor is one of direct allocation of which is not possible. The wages are indirect when the workers are not directly engaged in the manufacturing of products, and the wages cannot be identified to particular jobs or production. The example of indirect labor are wages paid to supervisors, workmen that I mentioned earlier. Now, the notes on labor costs. Labor cost can be divided into two types that I mentioned earlier. So, according to ICMA, direct labor cost is that cost which can be identified with and allocated to cost centers or cost units. Again, the cost of remuneration for employees' effects and skills is appealed directly to a product or a salesable services. The labor spent in altering the construction, composition, or condition of products, that is converting raw materials into finished products, is known as direct labor. The direct labor cost can easily be identified and allocated to cost units. It varies directly with production, thus creating closeness to production. On the other hand, indirect labor cannot be conveniently identified with cost units or cost center. ICMA defines wages as cost other than direct wages cost. So therefore, indirect labor cost is the amount of wages paid to workmen who are not engaged in the production of goods or services, but at the same time indirectly help the direct labor. In short, the wage paid to such workers cannot be identified with any particular work. Now, labor cost types. So, direct labor is the labor which is directly engaged in the production of goods or services. In other words, the labor spent in altering the construction, composition, and condition of the product is known as direct labor. And indirect labor, as you all know, is the labor which is not directly engaged in the production of goods and services, but which indirectly helps the direct labor engaged in production. The examples of indirect labor are sweepers, foremen that I mentioned earlier. Now, labor cost classifications. So, direct labor is all labor expended in alteration the construction, composition, or condition of the product. For example, wages paid to machines operator, wages paid to shoemakers, tailor, banker, carpenter, etc. So, according to ICMA London, direct labor cost is that cost which can be identified with the allocated to cost centers and cost units also. So, indirect, the labor charges which cannot be attributable to a particular cost unit or cost center is indirect labor cost. There are attributable to or absorbed by cost centers. Examples: salaries for foremen, helpers, storekeepers, cleaner, inspector, clerks, peon, supervisors, etc. Now, the labor refers to the human elements in production. No business activity is possible without the help of the labor. So, material are converted into finished products with the help of the labors. Thus, labor is one of the most important factors of production. Labor cost constitutes a significant portion of the total cost of a product. Now, in a broad sense, the term labor cost comprises only wages that have been paid to an employee, but in fact, it includes the monetary benefits like wages, dearness allowances, leave salary, etc., and non monetary benefits like medical, educational, recreational facilities, etc. Now, labor cost may be divided into direct and indirect according to ICMA London. It is the cost of a remuneration for an employee's efforts and skills applied directly to a product or sellable services. For examples, in furniture making, the wages paid to the carpenter is direct labor cost. And according to ICMA London, indirect labor cost means wages cost other than direct wages. In other words, which cannot be directly identified with cost units are termed as indirect labor cost. Wages paid to a supervisor, watchman, assistant, etc. They are helping different departments, and therefore their wages cannot be identified with a cost unit. It is treated as indirect labor cost. Labor cost classified based on variable and controllability. Labor cost incurred by a company is divided into two categories based on variability and controllability. So, direct labor cost is the portion of wages or salaries which can be identified with and charged to a single costing units also. And there is a direct relationship between labor and cost, and the product or process or cost units. Labor cost may be measured in the light of this relationship, and labor cost is sufficiently material in amount also. So that's for the end of my video, my friends. If you like my videos, as I always said, please subscribe my channel and comment on and share my channel. I need your support, my friends. Thanks a lot for watching my video.